While everybody is out here losing their minds about Crossu and giving up the second they load into a match against her, I've set my sights on something else entirely. I mean, I guess I could make a video talking about Crossu and why she's the worst thing to happen to the gaming industry since Fortnite released the Battle Pass, but I'm not gonna do that. I'm sure you've already seen a dozen videos talking about why she sucks to go against, and in case you're curious, I do agree with most of the arguments people are making right now. And no, I'm not going to tell you which ones. Let's just say I agree with the points you agree with and disagree with the points you disagree with. See, everybody's happy. Okay, jokes aside, I do have some opinions on the Crossu, but I'd prefer to talk about something I've been itching to talk about for a while now. That and the fact that I'm pretty sure she'll be nerfed before this video even comes out. And if not, well, you know what my next video topic's going to be. But no, we're not talking about Crossu today. Instead, we're talking about something that I find nearly as offensive as Crossu being shipped the way she was. Today, I'm falling back on something that you guys always seem to enjoy. Me complaining about poorly designed maps. Nothing seems to get you all more excited than me talking about the terrible designs of some of Dead by Daylight's most prominent issues, being map balance. In other words, behaviors attempt to get me to go into cardiac arrest every time I decide to play a killer who is an S tier or at least the top of A tier, or I decide not to play with a group of friends in solo queue like the brave soldier I am. And I imagine that today, I'll be able to properly explain a map that's been a consistent thorn in my side for the entire time I've been playing Dead by Daylight. A map that's almost as old as the game itself and has been a problem that entire time. A map that I'm sure you've lost on while playing killer at one point, Disturbed Ward. Today, I'll be explaining why this map is such an issue even after the most recent changes it's been given, before any of you start making comments telling me that this map was changed. Trust me, I know. And we'll get into each nook and cranny of this map and explain why it feels so perfectly imperfect. Join me while I talk about why you should hate Disturbed Ward. I've been workshopping this video for some time now and always planned on getting to it whenever I had the opportunity, but decided to wait after I heard it was getting some changes with the Sinister Grace update. I didn't want to make a video about it and have it immediately outdated, as then I'll just look like a complete idiot, even more so than usual. So I decided to hold off on all map videos until I could take a decent look at them and see how the changes flow with regular gameplay. Did those changes make the map any better to play on? Well, I guess you'll have to slow your roll and wait for a little bit before that, because this map has been a big problem for a long time, and I feel like it needs adequate coverage, like a news station covering a car accident. We all like watching tragedy unfold, right? Well, maybe not like, but we can't look away. That aside, this map has been in the game for a long time, and it really shows. Released with the Last Breath chapter, Disturbed Ward, part of the Crotus Pren Asylum realm, was actually the first DLC map we ever got, showing up with the nurse and everyone's favorite Swedish rebel, Mia. And for some reason, I always find myself referring to this map as Crotus Pren instead of Disturbed Ward, despite the fact that its sibling map, Father Campbell's Chapel, has been out for ages. Is that just me? Am I the only person that does that? Anyway, this map, just like the nurse, was completely unbalanced and a total nightmare on launch, and even years later somehow still manages to be a problem. It's actually impressive. Usually for a video like this talking about a map that's been out for nearly as long as the game has, I'd love to cover the history of it and how it's changed over the years, but to be honest, it hasn't changed that much until recently, meaning that the problems it has have been around forever. It did get updated with the Realm Beyond changes, which was mostly just a visual overhaul of how the map looked, in addition to adding some breakable walls, but even with that, the issues it has have remained largely the same for the map's entire lifespan. But why? What makes it such a problem? Well, that can all be boiled down to a few different reasons, only one of which is no longer an issue thanks to the aforementioned recent changes. But don't let that fool you into thinking the map is fine. It isn't. We'll talk about each issue and how it affects the gameplay in hopes that these problems get addressed at some point. Even if I know, deep down, they probably won't. Disturbed Ward's most prominent feature is the massive Asylum that sits at the center of the map, which is also, would you believe it, one of the most prominent issues the map has. Some of you who watched my video about breakable walls might remember me discussing the fact that this main building once had a bug where all the breakable walls that could spawn did. This made the building incredibly annoying to run as the killer and harder to access as survivors, creating a double-edged sword that somehow made the map more difficult to play on for everybody. Mostly killers. Behavior fixed this bug, of course, by removing all the breakable walls from the map instead of just fixing it like any other dev team would. Aren't they so quirky? Well, you might think this would make the main building much weaker for the survivors. It didn't really do that. I mean, sure, the killer no longer had to break the walls, but it gave the survivors the opportunity to enter the main building from basically anywhere. This meant as long as you weren't sitting in the corner of the map like all my solo queue teammates love to do for some reason, you could probably get to the main building from any angle, even being able to use the distance from a basic attack to get there. There are 4 main openings on the bottom floor, each facing a respective side of the map, which means you could be basically anywhere and have absolutely no issue getting inside. It wouldn't be the biggest issue if the Asylum wasn't incredibly strong, but unfortunately, it is. Inside the main building, there are multiple incredibly strong pallets that can spawn, which are so good that most killers are forced to break them the second they have the opportunity. Again, some killers handle this better than others, but a large chunk of them are going to have to break the pallets. There's just a lot of killers that can't deal with pallets that good. Not every killer can be Kaneki or Vecna, but which ones are strong? Well, typically the ones near the main front entrance, the one that divides the main building near the stairs, and any of the pallets on the second floor, all of which are equally as good. I'll cover each pallet and what makes them so damn strong in the regular gameplay. The pallets towards the entrances are really good and have basically the same strength no matter what version spawns. Thanks to the very open view the survivor has while looping, it's pretty impossible to get hit there depending on what killer you're facing. The most risk you'll face as a survivor is maybe a ranged killer or one with a dash, but even those can be pretty easy to avoid if you're paying enough attention. Again, you can see the other side of the loop, no problem, so as long as you're doing your best to mirror the killer's movements, you'll have no issue extending a chase for a decent amount of time, and just have to worry about dropping the pallet when you no longer have that distance. The pallets that divide the main building do vary in strength quite a bit though. The one that spawns close to the greenhouse is pretty weak, but it does depend on how much distance the survivor has. If the pallet is pre-dropped, you kind of have to break it, you just won't catch up otherwise, plus it connects to the main entrance pallets, which are very good as I talked about. The other variation that spawns is a god pallet though, which again do have strength that varies depending on the killer and situation. However, it combines really well into a window that we'll talk about in a second. And finally, the ones that spawn on the second floor play the exact same way, being incredibly strong and necessary to break when dropped. They're god pallets, just straight up. They just serve to extend a chase and make me want to off myself when I thought I finally had a survivor only to be blue-balled by the map. It's great fun. Besides the incredibly strong pallets that spawn inside the Asylum and the easy accessibility the main building has from pretty much anywhere on the map, we're still not done talking about it because it still has some issues. There are 2 windows you have to worry about when chasing at Disturbed Ward's main building, the window in the greenhouse and the one near the other set of stairs. The greenhouse window isn't nearly as strong now that the breakable wall has been removed, which is great from a balance perspective. Back then, you just had to hope the survivor didn't run there immediately and vaulted the window, as then you'd have to break the wall to continue chasing. We all love breakable walls, and as you can imagine, it was incredibly annoying. Don't get me wrong, the window can still be frustrating depending on how much distance the survivor has, as they can vault the window and circle back around to it from the outside and continue vaulting it until the killer manages to get close enough. That'll never not be frustrating to face, but it's much less problematic than it once was, and many windows on many maps have that issue. It does unfortunately have the issue that Garden of Joy's dining room window does, where the survivor doesn't get staggered despite a drop, which would be much more annoying if the entrance wasn't pretty close to it. But overall, it's not that frustrating. It typically doesn't lead to any pallets and can still be managed for the most part. However, the window I do find frustrating is the one on the other side of the building, near the other set of stairs. Not only can this window spawn incredibly close to some really strong pallets, with a variation of the entrance pallet being pretty close to it and also being near the god pallet that divides the main building, which is strong for obvious reasons. However, that somehow seems less annoying than the biggest issue I have with this window, being the incredibly annoying collision it has for whatever reason. Not the window itself, mind you, but rather the weird terrain around it. It's so easy to get caught on the collision due to how odd it feels to play, and really only benefits the players who know how to avoid it, and can use it to their advantage to get a few more window vaults when they probably shouldn't have gotten without it. Not knocking the players, obviously, but this is a clear flaw in the design of the map that needs to be addressed. The wall near the window from the outside looks weird, the collision is odd from a design aspect, and the window can be combined with a variation of pallets to add insult to injury. It's bad. It just adds onto the main building being an issue, which I've hopefully been able to properly explain. It's rough, but our issues with Disturbed Ward don't stop there. Now, this is where I would have talked about the map size and why it's such a problematic issue, but fortunately, this problem has actually been addressed, which is absolutely awesome. It only took almost a decade, but hey, better late than never, right? For the longest time, Disturbed Ward was absolutely massive at 172 square tiles, making it one of the largest maps in the game, which added insult to injury on top of the 6 maze tiles that could spawn across the map. I don't think I have to explain why large maps are an issue, but brass tacks, bigger maps create a massive divide between the killers with traversal abilities and the ones without. Since killers with those abilities are typically the strongest, it just makes the better killers stronger and the weaker killers weaker. That's why it sucked and why I take such issues with map size when discussing maps. I always bring it up and I always analyze it because I think it's integral to the strength of a map. However, as for the most recent chapter, Sinister Grace, the overall size was reduced. I can't find any information about how big the map is now, but it seems a lot more manageable if we're talking about the size alone, just based on my experience playing it. I'd love to get the actual measurements of the map size, but thanks to the lack of information about it, I can't really compare it to any other maps of a similar size because I don't know the size. Regardless, the change is very welcome, and any time a large map is made smaller is a win in my book. While you'd think this would be a net positive, unfortunately, as all behavior things do, it came with an ugly downside. So in addition to reducing the size of Disturbed Ward, behavior decided to, for some reason, increase the palette density of the map. I expect that they did this to try to make up for the fact that they were making the map smaller, which I don't understand in the slightest. It's not like the map needed an extra leg up. It was problematic for a long time, and trying to side grade it like this was a pretty awful idea. Well, the overall strength of the maze tiles was reduced, having the number of them that can spawn smaller and the variations of the ones that can spawn now much more varied, which can be a double-edged sword depending on some variables. However, I'd say this is overall a good thing. At least it limits the amount of long wall jungle gems that can end up appearing, which is good. However, that doesn't mean we're out of the woods. Far from it. This palette density update made it so the map now has multiple filler palettes that can spawn right next to each other, with potentially no dead zones between them. This means you can have god tier setups with some palettes right next to one another, which is complete and total ass for a number of reasons I don't think I need to explain. I think this is a product of behavior's more momentum focused gameplay model, as we've seen with some recent changes, but it just hurts the large chunk of killers who can't do anything about those tiles and just have to run through them like anybody else. Like I mentioned in my video about the slugging and tunneling changes, it just feels like behavior forgot that weaker killers exist, as stronger killers can get pallets down and broken much quicker than the weaker ones. And again, this hurts the weaker killers more than anyone else. Having a straight line of connected pallets that can all be combined by even the most unprepared player is extremely unhealthy, and I don't know how this slipped by to begin with. I mean, look at some of this footage I got. These setups are absolutely insane. The sheer number of potential pallets somehow makes the size reduction feel so much less impactful because the map now has a problem that's almost as prevalent as the size was. And I'm really hoping this is a bug or something, because it makes the map insanely frustrating to play on for the killer. The changes to the palette density is ungodly, and it really needs to be looked at again. While I'm glad behavior is trying to fix this map to begin with, it feels like they overstepped by making the palettes so much closer together. Again, I understand the thought process there. You want to make the map smaller and make palettes closer together in order to make the gameplay feel more exciting, but they overstepped way too much, almost like they did with the Krassu. While they did change the main building a bit, all of the issues that were there before are still there, and connected to the other issues just makes Disturbed Ward feel like a very unfulfilling map to end up on. Maybe by making the pallets in the main building a little weaker, or removing one or two of them, or making the window I complained about a bit easier to read, we'd be in a good spot. But right now, the map is still an issue, and that palette density definitely needs some looking at. Until then, that's it for me, gamers. Hope you enjoyed, and have a great day.